Now, while we're here, I didn't necessarily want to leave you hanging at the end of that last module where we sort of incompletely installed a copy of Nano Server directly onto a physical host. And the reason for that is, as you should know at this point, is because we didn't have the necessary drivers installed into the Nano Server image so that it could boot appropriately on that host. Well, now that we've gone through some of that prerequisite knowledge, now that we understand the DISM commands that allow us to then apply those necessary packages, I just want to circle back to where we ended up with in the last module there and actually go through the complete installation there of this Nano server. The reality is that there really is just a couple of things that you need to know. First, we've already talked about the use of these add, package, and DISM commands to add in a package or a set of drivers into a Windows image. And the way in which you accomplish that really involves many of the same commandlets. I do want to direct your attentions here to the USB stick itself, to the USB drive that we've been using there in that last module and also here in this module. Recall that here in this module, we haven't made any changes from what we did back in the last module, so everything here is exactly the same as what we left it. But when we made that copy earlier, we copied the Nano server WIM, and we also copied a set of packages that really weren't used by that WIM as it installed incorrectly there to our physical host. Well, Nano Server obviously has only a limited set of drivers that it can work with, and indeed the whole drivers like what you would use with the full version of Windows may not necessarily work here because of some of the other limitations that exist with Nano Server. But Microsoft has provided a separate OEM drivers package that you can install using the same add drivers commandlets that we've been working with here in order to get them baked into the WIM file as you go through that installation. And so those same commandlets like what we worked with here are something that you can reuse here in order to get that cab file added in to the WIM file. But I bring this up a second time because that is only one of the ways in which you can actually get these whole Nano servers incorporated with the extra packages that they require. I want to retreat back one more time here, if I clear the screen, to one of the commands that we used earlier in initially creating this Nano server image. That was the new Nano server image, so new Nano server image command here. Again, doing a standard edition installation with the deployment type here not of guest, but rather as host. Earlier, when we created our Nano server, we were creating that image as a guest image with a VHDX file. But here we actually want to create a WIM file that can be applied there directly onto a host. As before, we have the same kinds of other parameters. The media path here equals C:\\. The base path, for example, equals C nano server and then a subfolder. Let's call it nano server 2, for example. I need to set a target path also. That target path will be C:\\. nano server, then nano server 2, and then the nano server 2.wim file that we'll be creating. The computer name again, or the computer name here, will be nanoserver2. This is very similar to the command that we used earlier in creating that initial VHDX file that we added into our hypervisor to boot it as a Hyper-V virtual machine. But there are some additional parameters here that we have not yet explored that are part of the new Nano server image commandlet. And in fact, let me bring up some of these parameters here because they're very useful as you go through creating this whole image that we'll be later deploying to our physical host. Here for deploying Nano server, I just want to show you right down here as you're creating those custom Nano server images. There are a set of parameters here that you can enter in right here at the command prompt to go about adding in automatically the different roles and features associated with each option. And so it's the OEM drivers feature right here, or option, that will install those basic drivers for the variety of network adapters and storage controllers that are probably necessary to boot this thing on a host. There are a large number of other options that exist here, other packages as well that you can add in, and this list is obviously going to change over time. So this gives you kind of a feel for just some of the other packages that you can add as you go about creating this initial Nano server image so that you can include things like in our case here, the OEM drivers that are needed in order to successfully boot. So let us add in here into the command that we're creating OEM drivers and then compute, for example, so that we can also make this Nano server a Hyper-V host. If I hit the Enter key here and punch in my administrator password, this will now go about, again, creating that new Nano server image that we can then deploy over to our physical host and create exactly that kind of Nano server instance that we're looking for there on that physical host. I won't necessarily go through this process a second time, but as you can imagine, booting that host from your USB stick and then applying this WIM file via the commands that we worked with before are really everything you need in order to create that Nano server there on that host.